Okay, now we're going to get into some select and mask, and uh, we'll cover the last of the like common selection methods. There's probably a couple others, but they're fairly um, advanced, fairly obscure. If you go to select menu, there's a focus area option. This is kind of like the precursor to that select subject that we showed earlier. Um, I never, ever, ever use this because it just doesn't work as well. You can see it creates um, a really naughty, like chopped up mask. You can adjust the in focus range, the noise level, things like that. I never use it. Select subject works so well that that's the one I go to if I use that to base something off of. So I'm gonna give you a little extra trick that I do for something like this. This trick is going to be used to create or control some flyaway hairs. It works great on a seamless background, like a studio background, but it also works well on something that's really bokeh. So, like if you have a lot of blurry out of focus area in the background, it does not work well if you got detailed background. So, um, I got an image, and this is a smart object because it was pulled in straight from Lightroom. So if we go up to here and we're going to go to filter liquify, it needs to be a smart object for this to work. Not that you can't do it otherwise, but this is the most controllable method because then it's editable, non-destructive. So what we're going to do is put a little freeze mask on here. This interface is a little older, a little, yeah, it's just antiquated. So when you go to zoom, you tap to zoom in and press the Alt key to zoom out. There is no scrubby zoom like there is in the rest of in the newer functions of Photoshop. So let's go to the freeze mask, and this is a tool where basically you're telling the system I want to lock this stuff so it can't move. So in which case I'm going to just brush over like kind of where I want her hair to be. Okay. So, and I'm going to leave the little flyaways out of this because the point is going to be to control those flyaways. So let's pull this down and we'll get close to here. Press the space bar to pan around a little bit. And I'm going to pull down here. I'm going to bulge out a little bit here and then pull back in and brush down onto her hair and over her shoulder. And again, this is a freeze mask, so it's going to lock these pixels from moving. Okay. And just for safety, I'm going to brush over her face as well. Again, this has nothing to do with a masking tutorial, but it's kind of a cool trick that if you don't know about, it's neat. So we're going to go to something called thaw mask, which is essentially unfreeze. I went overboard here, so what I'm going to do is thaw out this to allow those flyaway hairs to kind of pull in. Okay. So now what we're going to do, press Command or Control 0 to fit the screen, and I'm going to go to this forward warp tool, and with the forward warp tool selected, I'm going to select a quite large brush, okay? And then I'm going to push these hairs simply toward that boundary that I created. And you notice everything inside the red is not moving, but I'm controlling the flyaways. And do not push them right up against that boundary, because everybody has flyaway hairs. They're not optional, and it looks really, really stupid if you create a very hard line. It looks completely false, okay? And if you pull too far, just pull back. Like I got this bulge where it's the hair. I'm going to pull that fairly close. I'll show you why in a minute. Um, so pull some of these flyaway hairs back. Be careful not to grab her shoulders while you're doing this. Now I want to thaw. Okay, same thing I did before. I want to thaw this stuff up here, the hair on top of her head and around the back. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble with my mouse hand again. So if we go up here and thaw out her hairline, okay? Okay, now I'm going to use the same forward warp tool, but instead of going in, I'm going to go out. So I'm going to add a little bit of volume to the top of her hair, okay? And you can be aggressive, you can be subtle. I'm being fairly aggressive, like probably much more so than I would on a real portrait, but I wanted you to be able to see this on the video. So there you go. You can see. You may end up with these. See that transparent pixel showing through up top? That's not a big deal. That's easy to fix, especially on a seamless background or a bokeh background, like I said. And you can imagine if you have something that's detailed, this warp tool just distorts the hell out of it, so it looks terrible. But this gives you a nice place to start. So let's go. I'm gonna hit Control Alt Shift E or Command Option Shift E and create a stamp visible layer, which basically just ignores or takes a snapshot of everything active. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill in those little areas just simply by selecting and going to Edit Content Aware Fill, and it'll do a pretty good job right off the bat. So we'll say OK. And it will fill those in, so we'll have a nice seamless background again. Once it finishes, press Command or Control D to deselect that selection I had. Okay, now now we're going to get into the actual select and mask. Select and mask is accessible from any of the selection tools, so like quick selection tool, lasso tool, anything. You can use select and mask. And what select and mask is it gives you your own sort of, let's call it your own environment to do selections from. And there's a number of selection tools available on the left hand side. You got quick selection tool, you've got the brush tool, you got lasso tool, the same kind of things that you'd have in the main Photoshop interface. This one is a refine edge brush tool. That is a little different, and I'll get into that in a minute. I'm going to approach this a little bit, let's call it opposite. Actually, it'll make sense in a minute. I want to select her body because her edges of her jacket, shirt, whatever shirt here, the edges of her shirt have some nice hard lines where the edges of her hair do not. So I'm going to actually do this in two stages. I'm going to do two selections, meaning that I'm going to worry about this, and then I'm going to worry about her face and her hair and all the flyaways and stuff after this. So we'll end up doing this in two steps. Okay, so let's zoom in here. This is the newer interface, so we don't have to worry. We got the scrubby zoom, so we can pull in, pull out, that kind of thing. So now, what do all these options do? On the right hand side, I've got different ways I can view this. Okay, there's something called onion skin. This is the one I use all the time. You can use the classic marching ants, which shows you that selection, that marching ant selection on the normal views. This basically says everything selected, show me in full opacity, and you can control the transparency of the background by pushing and pulling this so you can see how good your selection is. Works pretty well for the onion skin. Overlay does that same kind of quick mask red. I've got on black to show me how the selection looks on a dark background. I've got on white to show me how it looks over a light background. I've got black and white, which is the actual mask. And then I've got on layers, and I'm not 100% sure what this, I never use it, so I really haven't dug into what it does. Okay, so let's go and we'll pan down here a little bit, and you can see we've got an area that's not selected. So what I'm going to do is go to that quick selection tool, same as it works exactly the same way. I want to add this to my selection, so I'm going to simply go in and drag over and nibble, and you can see I got part of the background. So all I have to do is hit the minus and drag around to remove that. Okay. Now let's look at these options here on the right hand side for the edge detection. What edge detection does is tells Photoshop to look within a certain radius. So if I pull this out, what you'll see is that it should clean up my selection a little bit. And I don't know if you can see it, but it kind of did. For the hard edges, like the edges of a shirt and edges of a coat, edges of a vehicle, things like that, this is going to make very little difference. You'll need very small radiuses. Okay. And I'll get more into the details of this when I get to her hair, because that's where it's actually useful. So global refinements, what do those do? Well, let's switch this view to on black to make it more obvious, or actually on white will probably work better. So if we got smooth, I want to increase the smoothness of this. So what you'll see is any place where there's jagged edges, like you saw a little refinement happen down in here, it will clean up, it softens the edges, smooths the edges, exactly what you would think. So if you pull it too far, you'll see, well, in this case it probably doesn't matter too much because it's fairly simple lines. So I'm just going to soften it a little bit. Now feather does exactly what feather does and other things. It softens the selection. So let's pull this quite aggressively and give it a chance to update. You'll see it bleeds into the background. So now I can see the background. That's not what I want. In this case, I'm going to leave this very, very low. I'm going to put it, like around a pixel kind of thing. And then contrast. What contrast does is it sharpens up that selection. So it creates the here. This is probably easier to show. And I'm gonna pull this feather way to the right, and I'm gonna change this view to black and white. And what you'll see how that there's a soft edge there. Now, if I take the contrast and I push it to the right, what it's gonna do is it's gonna take the stuff that's closer to black and make it black. The stuff that's closer to white and make it white. So if I pull this hard to the right, you'll see that I end up with a fairly nice edged selection. In this case, so that's exactly what that does. In this case, that's not what I want to do because my feather is way too strong. I'm going to leave it around 1.2 pixels. And then you can sharpen this contrast if you'd like to. You don't really need to a lot, so maybe just a touch. Now, this shift edge, what does shift edge do? Well, let's put it back on white. Shift edge, if I pull it to the left, it moves the selection in on itself. And if I pull it to the right, it moves it out on itself, or away from itself. So let's pull this out, and you'll start to see the background leak in, okay? So you see that pink background show up, and I can pull this to the left, and it'll start to eat away at her shirt. Okay, so if you get an imperfect selection, and you just want to temper it a little bit, like what I'll probably do is go, just -3, -4 kind of thing, just to tighten it up a little bit. And you can go a little touch more aggressively because there's some pink background that's showing through here. And so if I press Command or Control 0, I basically got what I want. I got a nice selection around her clothing. Okay, so that way I don't have to say shirt or coat, even though it is a shirt. So now you can choose your output selection. Like, what do you want this to go out to? Do I want it to go to a selection, a layer mask, a new layer, all these different options. I'm going to go just to a layer mask. Okay, and we'll say okay to that. So now what you'll see is it masks off her shirt, and I got a little bit of her hair in there, but I'm not really concerned with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Command or Control J to duplicate that layer. Okay, and I'm going to throw away this layer mask. So let's go right mouse button on the layer mask thumbnail and delete layer mask. And now I'm going to worry about her hair. And this is where Select and Mask really shines on things with like hair and fur and things that have complex edging. So now we'll go to Select and Mask again. Whoops, wait a minute. Sorry, I want to deselect that other layer. For some reason, I haven't figured this out either. It pops back into the Select and Mask if you got the other one active. So in this case, I want to select her hair and her head. So we'll go down here and let's grab the hair on her shoulder and pull over her face. Go down. I'm gonna make sure I get a little bit of the information. Okay, so let's pull that up there, and that's a real rough, nasty selection, but you get the idea. Okay, so now we're gonna go to we'll leave it on onion skin. We're gonna go to this edge detection. And edge detection does exactly what I said before, in that if I zoom in here, okay, and let's look at the edges of her hair. So we've got some flyaways here. Now, if I pull the radius out, let's go quite aggressive. You can see some of those hairs start to come in, and it starts to eat away at some of the pink background in her hair and things like that. So if you go too far, it starts to kind of eat away at the main hair line and can look kind of like up in here. You can see like on just to the left of her eyes. It looks kind of choppy and nasty. But what we're gonna do is pull this back a bit. I don't necessarily use this a ton, and you can use Smart Radius too. So it says, well, if it thinks it needs to use a thinner radius, go ahead and do it. And this is really obvious where Show Edge is on. Okay, so again, if I pick this up, let's pull this edge to the right, and you can see it starts to encompass more of these flyaways. So that's where it will start to find the edges between that and the background. So again, I don't typically use this a lot, either the radiuses or the smart radiuses, because what I do, let me turn the show edge off, is utilize the second one, that's the refine edge brush tool. Because really what I want to do is say, look in this area. So you can see I've got the plus sign. So I want to pull over top of these flyaway hairs, okay? And I can control how much, let me narrow this radius down a little bit more. I can control where it looks for these hair edges, okay? So you can see I'm pulling in there. Let's pan this around a little bit. And so I'm basically telling Photoshop where to look and where to refine its edges, okay? And you can see it's eating away at her shirt, so I don't want that. So I'm gonna just go back to here and brush on to her shirt there. And you can see I got some of the background. That's easy to do. All you have to do is click the plus again and keep your cursor, that center of that cursor, out there. This is a fairly rough or a fairly soft brush, and you can control how soft it is. If you look here, we've got the same brush controls that we normally have. This is a hardness of 100%, so this is a hard brush, but let's soften it up a bit. So let's go in here, and I want to catch some of these flyaways and go up into here. Okay, and let's just brush around the edges of her hair. And what you'll see, I'll switch modes here in a minute. I want to incorporate some of these flyaways up on top of her head and brush around. And okay, here's where the pink comes in. So if I brush over top of these, what you'll see is I can very effectively remove the background. Okay, so it does a really nice job with those. So let's pull this around again, and you can see this, you can be as ridiculously detailed as you want. I'm gonna go into her hair to remove some of that. Be careful that you don't eat away too much at the real like hairline hairs. So let's pan this down again, and we're just about done. Okay, now if I switch modes from my view, onion skin view, to my black and white view, you can see there's a lot of really nice, fine um, flyaway hair detail, okay? And you can see it's done a pretty nice job of capturing that and removing the background, so it's created a nice mask for me. And I can do the same things. I can smooth this out a touch. I don't like to do this a lot on hairs. I like to keep it there. The feather I will pull just maybe leaving less than a pixel. Let's tighten it up just a touch. And you can shift edge, like collapse it in on itself or expand in any way I would like to. If I do anything with regard to sharp selections like this, I might go just a subtle bump in to tighten up the hair selections. Okay. Now again, I can output how I want. So we'll go layer mask. I'm going to go layer mask onto that existing layer. So we'll say OK. Command or Control 0 to fit the screen. Let's put these two together. Turn that one on, and you can see I've got a fairly decent selection. Okay. I do have some extra here. You can see there's a little pink that showed up on this lower layer. So what I'm going to do is click to my brush tool, select my, make sure my layer mask thumbnail is picked. And I'm going to say, well, because this incorporates the hair, I'm going to use this top mask. So I'm going to just brush it away from that information. Okay. So now let's create a background for this. We want to put her on a different, something other than this pink background. I'm just going to go and create a solid color adjustment layer, and just we'll leave it at black for now. I don't want to use black. Shut it off. And what I want to do is I want to take a complementary color to her pink shirt. So let's go in and we'll just pick a spot here. Okay, and when I say complementary, Photoshop can do this automatically for me, so I don't need to worry about this. All I have to do is turn it on, and you can see it comes in exactly the same color. But what I can do is I can go in and I can use invert of that. Then the inverse creates the complementary color for me. So all I have to do here is go in and say, well, I still want a light background, but I want it to be that kind of bluish color. Okay? So now you can see we've got a pretty nice selection that hovers her over top of this new background. Okay? Nothing crazy, just that's the way it works. Now, one thing you will notice is that the colors, I've got some color leaking. At times, you will have the option inside of the inside of Select and Mask to remove contaminant colors. I don't tend to do that because I don't like the way it looks. So what you can do is go in here, and I will create a new layer, and I'm going to clip this using the Alt or Option key to that layer below, and I'm going to select a color. Okay, just go onto my normal brush tool, and I'm going to change this to hue. Okay, now I'm going to pick a color that's kind of local. So we'll pick that, and I want to brush over top of this hair, and you can see it creates a transition to that hair color. Okay, so it changes the pink to the brown, and you can see it'll start to reveal a lot more hairs. Okay, and so let's go in, and I'm going to change my brush size a little bit. I'm going to change my select size, so we'll go in here and go over there, and whoops, that did not do what I wanted it to do. So let's change this. Again, sample and brush on, and you can see some of those real fine flyaway hairs. And don't hesitate to sample and remove and sample and remove. You know, sample and brush, sample and brush. Okay. So we'll go up here and brush over top, and I got a nice color, so I'm just going to continue along here. And you can see it reveals some of these ultra fine hairs, so I get a little more flyaways back, but I think it looks a little nicer. So we'll go and select this and just kind of brush over top of these. Nope, that's not what I want. Okay, so now Command or Control 0 to do that, and what I can do is then reduce the opacity of this kind of color fixing layer. And I'd have to do a little more in this, like I've got some pink background, so I didn't do a real great job in my selected mask. I'd have to go back in and refine that a little bit, but you get the idea. So now using selected mask, I've gone from something like this to completely change the background color and extract her and put her on a different background. So that's how selected mask works. Little bonus tips for some flyaway hairs that I use, and how to fix some color contamination. So that basically covers all of, let's call them the common selection tools. Hopefully that makes sense, and that's really kind of the end of masking without getting into some blend if and some really advanced channel work.